He's the director of the Finnish Foundation for Cultural Policy Research and also the senior researcher at the City of Helsinki Urban Facts. And he will be commenting on all the presentations that we have had in this second session.
Yes, so we have heard four very good, very informative speeches on immigration and integration in Europe, and actually it's quite difficult for me to give comments because I have so very little to criticize. How much time I do have? 15 minutes. Yes, indeed, it's very, very good speeches, and that's indeed what we also need in Europe, is a possibility to exchange ideas, get experiences from different countries, and to go on also on detail on what is taking place in different places, what is taking place at the moment, what might be taking place in the near future, and what we should think about all that. Right. I'll focus on the concept of integration that all of you touched upon, at least at some parts of your speeches. We are now in the middle of a refugee. I also agree with Lisa that calling this a crisis is a bit too much. An asylum challenge in Europe, and very much of the contemporary debate is focusing on refugees and asylum seekers. But when we are talking about integration, I think the first thing to remember is that integration is not something that concerns asylum seekers and refugees. It is something that concerns everybody that moves from one country to another country to settle there down more or less permanently. Also those who might, in the first instance, come as labor migrants. After all, it might happen that the place where they are working, their first place where they work is not the best possible where they integrate to the society, because, for example, they might do all the communication in English in Sweden or Germany or Finland, and therefore they wouldn't learn the language and so on. And also we have to remember that the large bulk of all migration is actually family migration, and the spouses and children, they also, in a way, they have to find their place in the society. And so this is that we should not forget at the moment that also now migration to Europe is much more than only asylum seeking. Well, immigrants should find their place in the society. That's actually the definition I translate it as such in Finnish. It is a process where somebody finds his or her place in the society where he or she is living. And of course, this is a kind of a challenge to anybody who moves to live in another country. But that's also some kind of a too narrow understanding of the question. I think we get fruitful ideas by taking a more broader look at it and thinking that everybody who lives in a society has to find his or her place in that society. And we who are working with youth or have children and have seen their growing up, we know how difficult these societies are actually to find your place in, to integrate. This is not only a problem in a way or a challenge for immigrants, it's a question that is relevant for everybody. And it's not at all always so that immigrants should have somehow very different kinds of, let's say, problems or challenges than anybody else. So it's a question that is relevant to everybody. And then there's a third level, it's a societal integration, that the societies should learn their own identities anew, to cope with the more diverse realities and also the more mobile realities. That it is the Finland of today is definitely not the Finland of 1980s and of 1950s, and it's the same of Germany, same of Sweden. And it's very interesting that in Germany you still have to go on discussing whether Germany is an Einwanderungsland or not, because it's already 50 years ago that it has been as such. And indeed, also Finland, also Sweden. I think Sweden is the most best proceeded country in Europe, in the sense, in that way of redefining itself. Then the second point about when we're talking about immigrant integration, we are mainly talking, politicians are talking, the media is talking about finding your place in the labor market. And of course it's very, very important. It's very influential for the, let's say, economic impact of migration, that how well those who come, how well they find a job and start having an income and paying taxes and so on. But it's also something very narrow, that integration is much more than only finding a job. It's also a question of socio-psychological well-being, of feeling secure in the place where you are living locally and nationally. It's about social networks that should be, let's say, larger, that should exceed the borders of your own ethnic or cultural community. It's about cultural integration, about learning the language, knowing the values, sometimes accepting, sometimes disagreeing with those values, understanding the more general cultural landscape in the country you're living in. It's about political integration, about understanding the democratic values of the society, participating in political decision making, at least by voting, and so on. So integration is also much broader in this sense, and it's very important to remember this, because we know, it has already been said, for many of those who have come, it will take years before they get that job. And it's very important for them to be integrated and to integrate to Finland, Sweden and Germany in all those other ways that they can integrate and will integrate. Because also those who have a job can be quite badly integrated, and also those who don't have a job can be very well integrated. So making the final judgment about whether integration and integration policy is succeeded or not should not focus on labor market situation only. Then I'll only very briefly mention that the second generation in Finland is very important. It's the crucial text for our integration policy, of which Germany and Sweden already has lots of experience that we actually have very, very little. But how Finland will look like in the future in terms of this growing diversity, it's very much a question how those people who are born here but who have parents who are born abroad, how they find their place in this society. It's then very much a question of equality, identity, about equity also in a broader sense. Finally, integration is a long-term process. We need to have patience. It's not something that takes place in a couple of days or weeks or even months. It's a cultural change that takes place at an individual level, community level, societal level, and cultural changes always take time. It's a question of integration policy, but we also have to remember that politics in today's world has its limits. I believe, a little bit cynically maybe, that the great labor market integrator is actually economic growth. And it's something that integration policy actually cannot affect that much. If we get more that kind of jobs that have a kind of a low threshold, that those who are newcomers can easily enter and get a job, that also helps the labor market integration a lot. And local level is important. That is, we have been focusing also, we as researchers, we have been focusing too much on the national level. We should know much more what are the good practices at the local level of integration. And finally, a question of Germany being a country of immigration, Sweden being a country of immigration, Finland being a country of immigration. That's also all very important debates. But what we still are lacking even more crucially, more seriously today, is a question of Europe as a continent of immigration. That somehow it seems that the whole Europe has missed the point to start discussing that indeed this continent is changing. This is a part of a global mobile world, which means that you cannot simply close the borders and think that we are living on an island. Thank you.